Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezerbrodt. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and we will be discussing the final episode about Gittin controversies. And this one is about one that is probably the most famous. Many people have read about and heard various presentations on, and that is the Get of Cleves. So let's see what Rabbi Dr. Eliezerbrodt is going to add to the conversation. I'm sure he'll bring unique perspective and illuminate some of the content that's already out there. We would like to dedicate this year in memory of Reb Shalom ben Reb Yechiel Michal. Rabbi Brot will talk about him very, very briefly. This was someone who was very close to Rabbi Brot. He was someone who had the opportunity to bring many, many Sfarim to print. Rabbi Brot, if you want to share very brief words about Mr. Shalom Jacob, who passed away, Rabbi Shalom Jacob, who passed away.
Yes, so basically, Rabbi Shalom Jacobs is someone I knew for over 20 years. He living in Muncie. He was a balabas, but I find it very hard to believe that he was really a balabas. I don't know when he really worked. He published over 25 svarim with footnotes, some of them even from manuscript, from Gedolim from the past 400 years, more recent times. And almost every year he would publish a different sefer. He was a tremendous Talmud Chacham, the Ha'aras he put in the svarim, there's history in the svarim, the mavois of them. And he was a major chayviv of Svarim, and he helped me a lot of times, sometimes producing something rare, a rare yediyah that he had from his library, or letting me know about some rare book. Very helpful person in general, Bechlal, and I'm sure all the Mechabri Svarim that he worked on greeted him right away. It's a shame about all the other Svarim projects he was working on. Okay, so today we hope to talk about is the one of the most important and famous controversies Bechlal in Jewish history, which is known as the Get of Cleves. So to begin is like this, the story in two sentences, and I'm saying that in two sentences, and soon we will get back to it more in length, is basically a get was written in 1766. Some people started to question the validity of this get, others defended it. The reason it was questioned was because it depended about the mental stability of the chassan. Now, because of this story, numerous chuvas and letters are written about this, and many of them were collected into two volumes. One was called Ar HaYashar, published in 1769, and then later on in 1902. And in 1770, a Sefer Ar Yisrael, which had in it a bunch of letters also. We'll discuss who the authors are and how it relates soon. Now, these volumes have many of the letters with dates and other information, so it helps us piece together a good idea of the story that happened. Besides, for this, some other documents survive to help us understand. Now, I'm going to return to more about this soon. First, I would like to mention is like this. When we're discussing a controversy that was a vicious controversy at the time, we have to keep in mind the words Ramatis Yos Trashon in Mivchar Ksavim. After he lists various controversies, he says, yes, at the time, people were fighting. It was vicious, and it was not of the different people. I could imagine certain times, fights on the internet, and everyone's tumbling, and everyone has a daya. Every yokel barrel shmerel has an opinion about something, and the mikvah news, and everyone's tumbling. But the people that were mainly involved, the gedolim, they were definitely l'shem shamayim. And they had, it was for them, it was mamish lishma. There was no evil things going on in the machlekes, chas v'shalom. And we have to keep that in mind as we'll discuss different aspects. Now, some say that this fight caused the downfall of how Hamoin Am looked at Gedolim, how the masses looked at Gedolim after this fight. I find it hard to believe. Maybe at that period of time for those few years, but it's not like the internet. I don't think it had a kiyum. I don't really think that it had a major impact later on. Maybe if someone reads the Svarim, certain aspects, will get them to that conclusion, but I think that this fight did not cause such long-term effects. As a matter of fact, I think that this fight caused a good thing. Again, obviously it wasn't good that there was a fight, and I'll explain what I mean. The outcome of this machlokes is that it's not just that it's a hot controversial topic, but because of it, numerous tshuvas were written, and these became today, and from when they were written already, as I'm going to show, the go-to literature on the topic of mental illness. And they are the starting point of all the conversations ad hayom for mental illness from this discussion. You'll see almost always, when someone's talking about mental illness, somehow the Get of Cleves is going to come in there. Okay. Now, we also see a bit of the halachic process, how Gedolim paskin such kind of issues, because many times the person in question is not in front of the Gadol, so they can't speak to them, examine, and interview them, so they have to rely on the information that was sent in the question. And we see over here what they had and how they reached their conclusions. Now, for now. So Bekitzer, Lamashal, there's a famous thing, declaring mental insanity. So it depends on the literature written for this topic. Okay. And I'm just going to mention briefly, just to show the Merzchius, however you want to call it, in Mesechtes Chagiga, which we'll see is where the prime sugya of shaita, of what a shaita is. He says, you want to know what a shaita is? Look in the Sefer Ara Yasher, where you'll see everyone, all the Gedolim are mavar what it is. His Rebbe, Rabbi Ephraim Zal Margolis, in a tshuva, which was published a little before 1815. It was published in 1818, but it was written a little before 1815, where a mayor, the Av Bezdin in Broid at the time, a good friend of Rabbi Ephraim Zalman, there was a complicated shaila about a shaita and a get, and basically Rabbi Ephraim Zalman was asked to help out with the situation, and all the diyunim was about going through the various tshuvas that the Gedolim had written in the Ar Yasher. Fast forward in the 1870s, there's a Gevaldik tshuva from Reb Chaim Vax in Tshuvas Nefesh Chaya, a massive tshuva also about a shaita, a whole interesting story. And what was the thing that played out when he was dealing with the shaita and the get, all the different aspects, the Sefer, Ar HaYasher, all the different tshuvas of the Gedolim, which we'll see about shortly. In 1910, I came across a work called Ar HaYisharim, which was also relating to some tumul about a shaita and gittin issues. And Rameir Simcha, in a letter that the Mechaber wrote to Rameir Simcha for assistance, Rameir Simcha said, "But Gufa Inyan, I remember ki echarem yuchrash advarv nechayim in this b'seichel Yasher is in the Ar Yasher. There's a tshuva from the Sefer Zikaron Yosef, but I don't have it in front of me." Okay, and we'll get to that tshuva soon. Just to end one other marmakim, Daderes, and also someone asked him a whole complicated question relating to Mashaita, and he says, you don't have to go any further. There's a Sefer Ar Yashar and about the get at that time, and it has all the issues to discuss what constitutes someone being a shaita. Okay, now it's a shame that these actual works are not easily around for purchase as they're so important, but Baruch Hashem, today one can find them for free on Hebrew books and Noitzah Chachma. Now, I'm not sure why, but the tshuvas that the Gedolim, which we're going to see, wrote on it, Lamashal, the Noid Yehuda, the Shargis Aryeh, the Zichron Yosef, they're not included in their own volumes that they published. Lamashal, the Noid Yehuda publishes Tshuva Sefer, Tshuvas Noid Yehuda in 1776. This fight happens a few years earlier, and it's published, I mentioned the Ar Yashar, a bunch of Tshuvas on the topic. It's not included in there. Okay, so you could say, for whatever reason, it wasn't published in 1776, but his son went ahead, Reb Shmuel, and in 1811 we have volume 2 of the Noid Yehuda. Even there it's not included. I don't know why not, but there is a letter in the Ar Yasher where he says specifically he's not against it being published. Okay. Similar, the Zichron Yosef publishes his Tshuva Sefer 1773, right after this fight. He has an interesting Tshuva about Shaita, which is also quoted, but he doesn't include, he has a bunch of Tshuvas in the Sefer Ar Yasher, also not there. I don't know the answer. Now, Lamaisa, sometimes we have that people do go ahead and publish it. Lamash in 1995, there's a Sefer Mishpei Das from Rav Farbstein, a massive Sefer on the Sugyos of Shaita, including Halacha Lamaisa, and he goes ahead and publishes many of the Tshuvas found in the Chibur Ar Yasher. But for some reason, he does a lot of censorship, and he takes out all the different things that happen in the story, and he just gives you like the basic bottom line of what comes out in these Tshuvas. He quotes only parts of these Tshuvas. Why am I pointing this out about the censorship? Because Lamais in 1902, a Yid went ahead in Galicia and he decided the Sefer is not around. It's so important. I already just mentioned a few cases, and there's probably many more, how this is the starting point in Hilchas Gittin and Shaita. So he went ahead to publish it, and he got Askamas from the Beis Yitzchak, from Shmuel Engel and others, and no one told him to censor any parts, even though there was this, as we're going to see, some very sharp material found in the Sefer. Okay, obviously this is something deals with the topic of censorship and preserving different things. Okay, fine. Now, anyway, as I said, Shaita, mental illness, it comes out from this topic. Sadly, mental illness today is very common. All kinds of aspects, is major and minor. There's some type of statistic that there's not enough people today in the mental health field to deal with it all. That's how bad it is currently in the world. Of course, we know how every yeshiva guy thinks he can easily be a mental health professional without even going to school. There was actually in the Mishpacha and the humor column, the Kichels, there was a whole write-up, there was a whole cartoon about the yeshiva bacher of the family, how he shows how he's a mental expert without going to school. But we know that it's far from the truth. It's extremely complex, and there are many, many aspects to mental illness. Just to mention one tiny example in current times, when the beginning of COVID, so right away the world was going crazy, and all different things were coming, and the Rabbanim had to deal with tons of different issues. And Lamashal, they put out on all the news forums and everything video of Reb David Cohn, and he was talking about, even though he didn't say it straight out, and then afterwards, the Amudim, they explained it, that many people found themselves to be alone. And there was problems, there was issues of how and when could, with it could cause people that have mental problems on Shabbos, could they reach out to their sponsor, all different types of things. He had a whole video where he explained that it's much more relevant than sometimes people, until you're thrown into it or you see someone that you know is involved with it, you don't realize how relevant these issues are. Anyway, that's just the Hagdama. And what I'm saying is that this sugya of the Ger Cleves, that's where a lot of the information comes from. Of course, just to one more minute, and then we get into the meat and potatoes over here. Basically, mental illness has been dealt with in the times of Chazal, but earlier, even in Tanakh. So this is in Dr. Yitzchak Prus's Sefer Refuah of Mikra Talmud has an excellent chapter about it. There's a book from Ephraim Shalom Shiner, Charigim Bal Karcham, which deals with mental illness in the Middle Ages and different materials from Rishonim that he was pieced together. Rev Bleich, Gedarke B'Kodesh, and Contemporary Halachic Problems has 2 beautiful chapters in volume 2. And in recent years, there's 2 Svarim. One's called Nafshi B'Shelasi, from a Rav and a psychologist or psychiatrist, whatever, and another Sefer called Mishpatei HaNefesh from another person who studied it, and they just came out in the past year, which they also deal barichos, all different aspects of mental illness. It's a very, very hot topic. And of course, in the book Headlines from Rabbi David Lichtenstein, he has, at least in some of the volumes, he has some chapters related to this also. Anyway, I'm not going to quote all the articles that there are out there that deal with the Ger Cleves, because it's mamish, everyone talks about it, and part of the reason is because I found that a lot of people, a lot of times especially in such a topic, everyone relies on the next person, and they didn't really necessarily go back to the Ar HaYashar to see the start. We have the documents, we have the story, so I'm going to go according to the documents that we have in front of us. Okay, so let's begin like this. What's the story? What happened? So we open up the Ar HaYashar, and we'll see momentarily who wrote the Ar HaYashar and why it's so important. But basically, there was a healthy Yid, and they stressed this right away. It's not like he had any known mental problems beforehand. A regular healthy bacher, and his name was Reb Itzik. He was the son of Eliezer Nyberg of Mannheim, the city Mannheim in Germany. And he gets married to, he basically gets engaged to a girl in Yaakov Gunhausen, okay, from Bonn, also in Germany. So they go to however, we don't have the details of how they got engaged, how they met, but the shidduch happens, and the chasna was scheduled for Ches Elul 1776 in Weir, Mannheim, the place where the chassan lived. Now, this is interesting because we see here something that in recent years people have pointed out. We see they did do chasanas happen in Elul. There is some type of musar shita that some people stay away from making chasanas in Elul. It affects the yeshiva world because Elul is a special time where they want the yeshiva world to be completely cut off from the world. There are sources actually in recent years after the war, some musar gedolim said such a thing, but we see here in Germany it was accepted, and there's many sources that in Elul there were plenty of chasanas in Elul. Anyway, so this is the chasana. They come. Now, who comes along? The family of the Kala come, and the mechaber of the Sefer Ar HaYashar. He's a good friend of the Kala's father, and his name is Aaron Shimshon. He comes originally from Copenhagen, and we're going to see he's the main person in the whole controversy, and we'll see why. The Kitzer, they come there, everyone greets them, blah blah blah, the whole story. Kitzer, they see the chassan looks a little tense. Okay, so basically, it turns out he was nervous. His father promised him on board that he's going to get a certain apartment, and someone else was in it. Settled it. He seems to be calm. Fine. Anyway, the marriage happens. Fine. They're sitting on Friday night. Friday night after the chasana, they're sitting at the table, and it seems he gave his drasha, and they didn't let him finish it. The guy points this out, right? Singing in front of a chassan's drasha, which is actually the way I got to the get at Cleves, was many, many years ago, researching the topic of the drasha of the chassan, was in the story of the get at Cleves. Right away, he gave his drasha and he was interrupted. So you see in Germany, in 1766, they already was singing in. Okay, anyway. The Kitzer, he's all happy, and then someone, his relative who was a doctor, tells him, "Don't eat this; it's not good for your health." This is the Shimon. Reb Shimon he's an eyewitness account of telling, "Well, have time, say that." Bottom line is, he eats what he's not supposed to eat. We don't know what it is, why he shouldn't have eaten. We're not given any of this information. And the Kitzer, what happens is the next morning they go look for him and they can't find the chassan. Turns out he ran away. He left the Tchum, and he was Mechal Shabbos, and they found him nearby Bun, by a guy, and it seems he wasn't himself. And then they found him and they brought him back, and according to the way we see it, he was okay, and he explained something happened. He was all, again, not clear exactly what happened. And he took a certain sum of money. He said, pay the guy. I told the guy if I could stay here, I'll give him Epis money. But he knew the exact sum of money and everything, basically, fine. And then he go back, fine. So it sounds like there was some type of, he must have had, again, I'm not an expert, so just the words that are used in this thing, some type of breakdown. But how bad of a breakdown? No way to know. Okay. A Kitzer, he comes back. Everything seems to be fine. Again, this is how this Reb Shimon is writing up the story. And then it seems there was a fight between the Kala side and the Chassan side, some money issue, but they resolved it also. We don't, those details are not good. Okay, fine. Then already in middle of Sheva Brachas, it's decided that he's going to go back already to the Kala's city. Fine. So the Kala's father, the Kala's mother, the Kala, and this Reb Shimon, they go back to the city where they came from. He's there for a day or two, and he acts like the chassan. He gets the special aliyah, and everyone's talking. And then after Shabbos, he tells the father of the Kala he just wants a divorce. And okay, the father of the Kala calls in his friend Reb Shimon, and Reb Shimon says, whatever, he talks to him, whatever, fine. Say, then now the city where they were in didn't have a rav to do a get, so they decide where should they go write a get in the areas near them, and so it was decided they're going to go to Reb Yisrael, the Rav of Cleves. It seems the chassan said that he wants to go anyway to England, so it's on the way. Fine, say that. So they go to this Rav. This Rabbi Yisrael, the Rav of Cleves, was an expert in Gittin, an old Rav, and he writes, they meet him, they have a whole conversation with him. It's a few-hour process, the writing of the get, which Old Daf actually had a video to show the whole process. The Dayan speaks to him, this Rabbi Yisrael, this expert Dayan in writing Gittin and everything, speaks to him for a few hours. He says different things, and he seems to be completely normal, this chassan. There's no evidence of any breakdowns or anything, or that he's having thing. He might have said certain things that could be interpreted that something's wrong, but fine. And Kachava, he goes, he gives the get, and Shalom Al Yisrael. All of a sudden, and he leaves to England. Chassan leaves to England. So it's a divorce. So you would think this is what could go wrong. All of a sudden, the chassan's family, they were not there. They didn't travel to the Kala city, and the father's like goes nuts. What are you doing? My son, and what's going on? How did he do right again? And when he's going to England, obviously something's wrong. What's going on? And the Bezdin of Mannheim basically says, what are you talking about? Everyone knows this guy had a mental breakdown on Shabbos of his chasana. So, and you're going to let him, and he's saying that he needs to go to England, and he's saying all these funny things. It's clear he's a shaita. And then, as they say, La Yuda Ma'isayra, and from there on, it gets all Lebedik. Basically, the Mannheim Bezdin gives it over to the Frankfurt Bezdin, and the Frankfurt Bezdin claims it's pashut, that this guy is a shaita, the get wasn't good. And how in the world did Rabbi Yisrael of Cleves give a get? They have no idea. He should have known. Now, okay, so what said is like this: he wasn't told, and he didn't know about this mental breakdown that happened on the Shabbos. But if he would have known, maybe he wouldn't have given the get. But it's clear that he was not in his at this time when he's talking. He's even though he's claiming that he had a few-hour interview with the chassan, he was not full faculties, as they say. Okay, Fine. Eventually, Lamaisa the Chassan comes back after a whole tumult, and fine. Seder we'll get to see about if there was a happy ending to the story or not. Now, what happens like this? First, the first question is, who in the world? Why is this? So he said the Frankfurt Bezdin ends up getting involved, and they say this get is not good. So we have the Mannheim Bezdin saying the get's not good, the Frankfurt Bezdin not good. Rabbi Yisrael gave the get, and he's an expert at get. They say he didn't know. He didn't know that he was a shaita. He didn't know the story of what happened on Shabbos, the breakdown.
So what do they want to happen now? They want to say he's still married. His marriage never was a marriage. What do they? What do they want?
So the marriage. So it's clear already is the marriage. The breakdown couldn't have happened before. As I said, it seems he was good. Then forget about it. The point is that something happened. A mental illness could happen suddenly. Something happened, and he's not able to give a get when he gave the get. So even though he gave a get, this Rabbi Scroll gave the get, and everything was kedas within. It's not good because he's a shaita giving a get. That's the question.
So she's still an Eishes Ish.
Yes, that's what they want to be. Okay, fine. So now we're going to stop for a second, and we have to understand this Reb Aaron Copenhagen. Who in the world is he? So he said he seems to be a friend. He's there the whole time. Now, he turns out he's the author of the Sefer Ar Yashar, which is going to be the whole story.
Just to clarify, you mentioned someone Reb Shimon before. Is this the same person? His name is Aaron. You said Shimshon.
Yeah, Reb Aaron
Clarify
Shimon.
who you're talking about.
You're right. We'll call him, to make it much easier, we're going to call him Reb Shimon, but his full name is Reb Aaron Shimon Copenhagen. Who is he? So because he's not a relative, it seems. He's just a good friend of the Kala's father. He lives in their city, and he came for the Chasana, and he seems to be a learned person. Why do I say he's a learned person? Because you could see is he put out this whole Chibur Ar Yashar, which we're going to now see what it is. It's basically Rabbi Yisrael of Cleves reaches out to all the Gedolim and says the get that I gave is valid. And we're going to see why it's valid. And the Frankfurt Bezdin, they're completely wrong in what they're doing. And Taka Kachava, we're going to see the reasons why. The Gedolei Olam at the time defend Rabbi Yisrael of Cleves and say the get is a good get. And obviously the question is why. So basically, this book, the Ar Yashar, is all the documents and everything, everything that's going on. Who put it out? This guy. He seems to be a very learned person. You could see from the way it's written and the language, unbelievable language. It turns out, for example, right away in the beginning, he quotes a whole list of things, a whole list of takanas of bezdin that was accepted in a whole bunch of literature. That once a bezdin paskin something, another bezdin cannot butt in. So if let's say Rabbi Yisrael Cleves said it's a good get, a bezdin of Frankfurt has no business getting involved. Meaning to say, once Rabbi Yisrael Shklov, not Rabbi Yisrael Shklov, but Rabbi Yisrael of Cleves, once we assume and we know, and we're going to see that he was a tremendous Talmud Chacham, an expert in Gittin, then no other bezdin from a different city could get involved. This was an accepted takana, accepted in Europe. So this Ar Hayash, this Mechaber, Reb Shimon, he brings a whole list and says, before Mannheim bezdin has no business getting involved. The father says, my son, blah, 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 doesn't make a difference. The Frankfurt bezdin has no business getting involved. There's an accepted takana, and he lists 2 pages of all the places of the takana. Anyway, turns out he's a son-in-law and a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Miller. Rabbi Yehuda Miller was one of the Gedolei Olam in Ashkenaz at the time. He was someone that knew the Chacham Tzvi, but he was very close with all different Gedolim. And again, one of these Gedolim that only recently do we get to know more about him, as Mechon Yerushalayim published a whole volume of Chuvas of this Rabbi Yehuda Miller. We see he was a Gedolei Olam at the time in Germany, and this is his son-in-law. But not only was he his son-in-law, he was a Safra the Daina. He was the Cipher. He was an expert in the procedures of the Gittin, and he was his Cipher. And he wrote all the different things in the different Chuvas and everything. We're going to see more about that. Lamashal, one of the Chuvas that written in the Sugya to defend the get, to say the get is good, is a Yid Rabbi Shua, who wrote a Chuvas, Rabbi Shua from Lemberg. Rabbi Shua Lvov, and he was a Rav also in Germany, one of the Gedolei Olam at the time, which also, until recently, we didn't have so much tire from him, but he has a tshuva in the Sefer Ar Hayashar. Not one of the. There's a few Gedolim that the only tshuva we have of them is in this tshuva Sefer of Ar Hayashar. Besides, there's plenty of famous people we'll see, but there's plenty of people that this is the only piece of literature that survived. So this Yid was a tremendous gadol in the times in Europe, in Germany. So he writes, why am I trusting this Reb Shimon? what's happens? Who is he? So he says he's the Safra the Daina of the Bezdin of his father-in-law. I've been in contact with him for 30 years. Although I never met him, I know he's Adam Kasher Ad Ma'od, he's a tremendous Talmud Chacham, and he's Adam Musmach. And you could see throughout the volume in various chuvas of the Gedolim, they say, why are we relying on this person? The answer is he's a Talmud Chacham and he's a Faleslich Yid. So they all the Gedolim, and we see the Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt, and others, they knew of him and they write very bakavadik of him. And that's why we rely on the Sefer Ariyasher, because technically you say, what do you mean? Who is this guy? And he's going up against the Sefer, in the Sefer, he's collecting all these letters against the Frankfurt Bezdin. Maybe he made up the whole story. Okay, anyway, that's just the point there. Fine. Why does he write the Sefer as a collection? Is because basically his name was being smeared. They were bad mouthing him at the time, and it was vicious. He says specifically, I'm not writing the Sefer, which I'm about to say what the Sefer is, because I'm against the Dayanim of Frankfurt. I'm not against the Av Bezin of Frankfurt, Rabbi Avram Milisa, who is the head of the Frankfurt Bezin. I'm against one person, and we'll get to see who that person is. But this fight gets vicious, and there's patchkevillen put up, and signs, and burnings, and all different things. Because of tumult in this fight. Okay, what happens is like this. As I said, Rabbi Yisrael of Cleves, he ends up writing to the Gedolim to help him, and Rabbi Shimon also does, and many Gedolim get involved. So first, before anything is, who are the Gedolim involved? Just to mention, I'm going to give a 2-minute list of who the Gedolim are involved. So first, I said Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz. Who is he? Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz is the Av Bezin in Cleves. So he's a Talmud of one of the Gedolei Olam, the generation before, the Knesset Yecheskel. And he was a known gadol, he was a known person, and he was a known expert in Hilchos Gittin. And we could see there's plenty of documentation that they write about him, tremendous things. The Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt in his tshuva over here on this topic says he was known as a Chashav Yid, and the Yehuda says a Chashav. But Kitzer, and the Shagas Aryeh. So we're talking about an expert Dayan writing a get. That's number one, and that plays out very importantly. Now, who's the Frankfurt Bezdin? So the Frankfurt Bezdin, the Av Bezdin, was Rabbi Avram Milisa. He dies in the middle of this controversy, 1769. He's a Talmud Muvak, and he ends up marrying the granddaughter of the Beis Shmuel, and he becomes a tremendous. He becomes the Rav of Frankfurt, and the people of Frankfurt loved him. He was a tremendous Adam Gadol, and we know a lot about him. Okay. The other person in the Bezdin, which is Reb Nosson Maz. Reb Nosson Maz was also one of the Gedolim of Frankfurt. There's a lot about him. He was a tremendous Talmud Chacham. He wrote a bunch of Svarim. Some of them only came out recently on Gittin and Kedushin from manuscript. Al Torah. There's a Yiddish forum on the internet where they've been publishing different stuff, and eventually they put it out as Svarim and PDF. So they published some of his material Al Torah, and in recent years, and he was a Talmud Muvuk, as he writes, of the Pnei Yeshua. He learned by the Pnei Yeshua for many years and other Gedolei Olam. But Kitzer, he could not become the Av Bezin of Frankfurt because there was a special takana in Frankfurt that if you're born in the city, you can't become the... Okay. Anyway, so him and Rabbi Avram Lisa and their Bezdin altogether, about another 10 people, they were against the get. And the Monaim Bezdin, fine. But who's pro the get? So with Kitzer, there was a Gadol, one of the Gedolei Olam at the time, Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt, one of the great Gedolim, Rosh Yeshiva in Fiorda, Rav in all different places, a brother of Rabbi Shai Berlin, and we could talk about him for hours. We're not going to, but Bekitzer, he was one of the Gedolei Olam in the world of Ashkenaz at the time. He writes numerous tshuvas pro the get. The Noam Yehuda was one of the main people in this topic, in this sugya. He writes pro the get, bunch of tshuvas. The Shagas Aryeh is one of the greatest Gedolim at the time, worldwide, world famous. He's involved with this story, and he also says the get's good. Rabbi Yaakov Emden also writes a bunch of tshuvas to this on the topic. Comes out the get is good. Markevis HaMishnah, Reb Sholmi Amsterdam, Reb Itzel Hamburger, Reb Yeshua Heschel, which we mentioned, who wrote the Sefer Pnei Levana, Reb Dover Berlin, who's the brother of Reb Shai Berlin, another brother-in-law of his, Reb Naftali Tzvi Hirsch Katzenellenbeigen, because Reb Yosef Steinhardt, who I mentioned in the beginning, he's also a brother-in-law. Because the Reb Shai Berlin's family gets very involved, and they're all pro the get. Okay, Reb Naftali had a brother that was a Chashav Rav, Reb Eliezer Katzenellenbeigen, he also is pro the get. Okay, and the Cleves of Bride gets involved, and they're all pro the get. Of course, there were Gedolim, yeah?
You mentioned the Cleves of Bride. Why don't you stop for 1 minute and just tell the audience what is the Cleves of Bride?
That's a terrible problem. 1 minute is impossible, but basically the Cleves of Bride was this unique, elite group of people that was going on for years and years and years, and people learned there in this Cleves, Kabbalah, and they learned Nigla. Plenty of Nigla was learned there. The Noda Yehuda was originally part of this Cleves. Reb Chaim Sanzer, not your Reb Chaim Sanzer that you like to always point out that your connection to him, but the early Chaim Sanzer, who is not anything to do with Hasidus, although the Hasidim like to make him that he does have to do with Hasidus. He doesn't have to do with Hasidus, but he definitely has to do with Kabbalah. He's in the Cleves Bride, and there's many Gedolim that were there. Some Rabbanim that were Ravs and Rabbanim in different cities, Saif Yamav, they would go Saif of their times, like they were retired, they would go here, but we know many different people were here. The Yehuda learned here for a bunch of years. It was an elite group of people. But the Chiddush is they were Isaac in Halacha and also Kabbalah. What happened is many Svarim that would come out for years, they would come to these people to get Askama, sign Halacha, sign Kabbalah. Some now they also played a role in various controversies as time went on. Lamashal later, a little later than this controversy, the fight with Hasidus, they get involved. And the question only is when was the full kayach of the Cleves Bride and until when it was and how it was supported? These are questions not for now. But the point is they were 10 Gedolim of the Cleves. We know these Gedolim signed on this, that this get is good. Okay, now the Markevis HaMishnah also I mentioned. Okay, fine. Anyway, there were also Gedolim that were asked to get involved, and they didn't want to get involved. Lamashal, there's a Reb Shlomo Herzfeld, who's the son-in-law of the Pnei Yeshua, and the son of the Pnei Yeshua, another great gadol in Germany at the time, Rabbi Leib. They're asked to get involved. Lamaisa, they don't get involved. I suspect a theory of mine is that because the Reb Nosson Maz was anti the get, and Reb Nosson Maz was a Talmud Muvik of the Pnei Yeshua, so maybe they felt they don't know all the details, so it's not for them to get involved. Anyway, that's just a theory. No idea if it's true. Fine. But Kitzer. Now we said all the names of them. What's the issue of the get? They say he's Pashut, he's a shaita. He had this breakdown on Shabbos. He's a shaita. Nothing to talk about. So now the question is, why did the father let him go to there? So it could be maybe he wasn't a complete shaita. Maybe they felt he's going to get better. Okay, but he's a shaita. And now the Bezdin of Frankfurt claims to have gotten tons of testimonies of people that said that this guy is a shaita. Okay, but they never release it. Okay, so now we have to go drop into this topic, and very briefly is, what is a shaita? And then we're going to get to what was the defense about this sugya. So, Bekitzer, there's a Tosefta and Shumas, and already it's a Gemara and Chagiga. Shaita comes up in Shas millions of times, but what's the definition of a Shaita? So, in Chagiga, Beis Gimel Beis Daled and Aleph, it says, what's a Shaita? Yotze Yichidi Balayla Halon Bebeis Akfaris from a Karea Es Ksusai. He rips his clothes. So the Shaila is, how many times does he have to do it? Does he have to do all three? What about he does other things that sound crazy? And Lamashal, the Gemara brings in another thing. He loses everything you give him. Okay, anyway, Lamaisa, what's this shaita that the Gemara is talking about? Rashi already says, we want to know everywhere you find that he's pater mitzvahs from Einish and his kinyan is not a kinyan and he's not going to do his sales or not sales is going to be dependent on this. And this is a Gemara that there's a lot to discuss. The Taisvis, the Yechuset Amiram from the Balia Taisis also has a huge arichos on this Gemara, and like everything else, it's a ganze sugya. What is the is it dafka? Do you have to do all three? What about if he does other things? There's a Rambam in Hilchos Eidus, which is interesting, and this is what they point out, why the Rambam waits till Hilchos Eidus, because shaita comes up all the time. But he says a shaita is pasal Eidus min ha'Torah lefi she'ein ben mitzvahs. And then the Rambam says, so the Rambam sounds like that it doesn't have to be the Tnoim of the Gemara. Anyone that it sounds like his brain is lost. But obviously the problem is how does one define it? In the olden days, it used to be that when you were in Cheder or in Yeshiva, your Rebbe would tell you, shaita. And so it was used. Today, it's obviously not politically correct to say such things. But the word shaita could have multiple meanings. One guy's going to say someone's a shaita, the other guy says he's a brilliant guy. And Lamaisa, the Rambam in this over there, Parak Tes Alachayud, he says, it's very hard to define exactly what a shaita is. So between me and you, this also plays out a role in the sugyas of shaita and mental halacha ara yoim, because a lot of times we have a Gemara that says something and it seems to be this is referring to some type of mental illness and requires explanation what it is. Okay, fine. Anyway, there's a ganze tumult about the Rambam, but this is the Gemara of discussing the shaita. But Kitzer, so why in the world would this get be good? This guy had a mental breakdown and he might be a shaita. He's a shaita. So first, like this. Number one, what's thrown out, and this is thrown out again and again throughout the documents in Ar Yashar, is the Chayim of Rabbeinu Tam, which we mentioned already a bunch of times in previous episodes of Gittin. Rabbeinu Tam said once it gets given by competent Dayanim, you can't come around and do something. You just can destroy the whole system. So different Dayanim said right away, well, we know Rabbi Yisrael of Cleves is an expert Dayan. End of discussion. You're saying he didn't know information? It doesn't make a difference. Okay. So this obviously is a tough conversation, and one has to go back to understand the sugya of the Chayim of Rabbeinu Tam, the Makayers for it, and what Rabbeinu Tam meant, and why. Because we see sometimes in the previous episodes, we also saw some people ignored this Chayim, and they said the get is not good in other tumults. But over here, this is again brought up. Okay. Lamaisa, many of the Gedolim, including Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt, they say Pashut. Was this Dayan an expert Dayan? Did he say that he had a long conversation with him? Did he notice anything about him being a shaita? So even though he had a breakdown, let's go with the worst case scenario. He has a full-fledged breakdown at that time on Shabbos. It doesn't make a difference. Right now, he's not a shaita. Just because he has a breakdown, that does not define him that he's not a shaita. He could get better. That's clear in halacha. So Lamashal, Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt says this, and many of the Paiskim in this discussion, they bring this point up. And this obviously plays out in understanding the Gemara and Chagiga. What does it mean? But even if he does any of these things, or if he does something else, he ran away over here, Lamashal, so he didn't go to basic forest, he didn't do any of the things, so it's because we're going like the Rambam, and it's not dafka these things that are mentioned in Gemara, but still, who said that doesn't mean he's la'olam vayed. It means just because someone does something and has a breakdown one time, we don't pass on forever. Now, another taina, which already Rabbi Yaakov Emden brings up, but many of the Gedolim say like this: you, Frankfurt Bezdin, say that you have a bunch of edus that you collected from a bunch of people. You have to release the protocols and the testimonies that you got for us to see. You're telling us that we have to rely on you. You decided to get his puzzle. And you tell us we have a whole bunch of reasons behind it, but we're not telling you. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, says the Shagasari, says the name Yehuda Barichus, and Rabbi Yosef Steiner. There's no such thing. Halacha is based on, when you make a psak, we have to see your reasons. You don't want to tell us your reasons, we have no reason to accept what you're saying, and it's unheard of, unprecedented to do such a thing, what you guys are doing. That's what all of them wrote, and they wrote this into the Bezdin. They wrote them in Frankfurt, and Frankfurt kept on ignoring them. They did not want to answer them. Said we have our reasons, we have inside information, and he's a shaita, and that's it. They didn't want to hear from anything. Problem is like this, that already the Shagasari and all the Gedolim, they say it doesn't make a difference. Even if he had that breakdown, he's not a shaita. You're making a fundamental mistake. So you got gvias edus of people that saying he's a shaita. That's not enough of a reason. It was Bekitzer, the Lamashal. One of the great Gedolim involved was Rabbi Sholem Amsterdam. So he was one of the big Gedolim at the time, involved in many of the different controversies of Goyin Olam. So the Frankfurt Bezdin was trying to get him to be on their side, and they wrote him, and he said, "1 second, tell me what you have, let me see." And they didn't want, so in the end, he went through the sugya, and he says, "No, the get's good." And the same thing happened. Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt also, he tried to understand what's going on with the Frankfurt Bezdin. These are people. We're not talking about people in the North Pole. This is Germany. This is all happening in Germany. So a lot of the Rabbanim, they're in Germany. They know these Dayanim. They know the Frankfurt Bezdin. They're big cities. They get along and everything. So they want to know what's going on. Tell us. Lamaisa, in all these chuvas, and that's what made these chuvas very important, is they deal with barichos, the sugyas and the lamdas of what's a shaita, and the sugya of chagiga. And Lamashal also, Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt in his beautiful chuvas on the topic in here. Fine. And at one point he says, Frankfurt Bezdin, you made a mistake. And he brings a long list. This time people make mistakes. Admit it. This is what Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt writes to them at one point. Rabitzel Hamburger writes a whole 4 chuvas. You guys are wrong. It's unheard of. He's not a shaita. He did it once. This breakdown happened once. Okay. Lamasha, I told you that I mentioned earlier the Sefer Pnei Levana from one of the Gedolim at the time, who we only know thanks to Mechon Yerushalayim. In Mamish in the past, less than 10 years ago, a massive tshuva Sefer called Pnei Levana comes out. The only thing we had from this Rav beforehand was his tshuva on the Get of Cleves. Now we have everything about him. So he writes Arichos over here. We even have his original tshuva that he wrote for the Get of Cleves right in the 1760s. It survived. It's in Hebrew University. But Kitzer, he says, there's no such thing. You have to tell us your reasons, and you're not telling us the reasons. Now, at one point, something comes up very interesting in the course of this conversation, and that is mental illness. So he says, Worst case scenario, what's this? How do you explain what happened with this chassan? Is he had what's called mara shchayra. So melancholia. That's the medical term. Again, today there's tons of literature about it. But interesting like this. I'm just going to say one yediyah relating to this. This tshuva, this Pnei Levana says, where does he get this information from? The Maisa Tuvia, who was a great Chashav Yid from the generations before, was a medical doctor, but also a tremendous Talmud Chacham. The Maisa Tuvia says such a thing. Now, what's Marish Chayra? So it seems that it's a certain type of depression, but the person he has his faculties in many of the cases. And Lamashal, the Aruch HaShulchan writes in Simon Kuf Chaf Aleph, what about someone that has Marish Chayra? And he says, he doesn't do all the mishagas and all the different things, but he just stays quietly. He's a loner, and he's not able to eat. He's not able to concentrate. But if you talk to him, he's able to talk. He's not a shaita, and you wouldn't call him a shaita. He definitely doesn't have the stuff from the sugis and chagiga and everything. But even though one of the examples in chagiga might sound like this marish chayra, so he by shver, he doesn't know what it is. But says the Pnei Levana, maybe that's what happened to the chassan on Shabbos. But then he's beseder. Now, how do we know he's beseder? Because this Baal Haget, this author of the Get, Rabbi Yisrael, interviewed him I think it was 3 hours he's discussing with him. He said the whole time he's there, he's never acting up. He's not. Now, this Reb Shimon, all the Gedolim are relying on, says, what do you mean we traveled? He was completely sane. He didn't do anything that was acting out. So he's not a shaita. Bekitzer, interestingly enough, we find people that had depression, and they were beyond prolific, and they remained Gedolei Olam. Just to mention, a lot of times we have today autobiographical accounts of different Gedolim. So, Lamashal, we have Rabbi Yaakov Emden, a famous autobiography of his. Different times in his autobiography, he writes he was depressed. I'm not saying he was depressed the whole time. He says very strongly these Marish Chayr type things, but we see he was a guy in Olam, he was prolific, he was everything. Okay, Chida. We have his travels. Certain times it was very rough in his travels, and he writes about himself that he had Marish Chayr at certain points in time. He overcame it, and Marish Chayr, it sounds clear, it's possible to overcome. Lamaisa, we know, and they discuss Barichas about the Chida. We see people, Gedolim, were able to overcome it. They had it, and they overcame it. Anyway, so the worst case scenario is that was the case with this fellow. Anyway, the Noda Yehuda has a Arichos Nifla in the Chuvas, where he says a lot of different things I mentioned up till now. He has Mordeka Chedushim in the Sugyas of what a Shaita is to handle with the Rambam. And again, we're not going to go through all the different things over here. The same thing, the Shagas Aryeh, it's Gevaldik, his Tshuva, or this Rav Eliezer Katz and Ellenbeigen. The Kitzer, as I said, all the Gedolim at the time were very, very strong that it's a good get. I mean, many of the Gedolim that are mentioned over here. Just to mention two different things with the two Yediyas with the name Yehuda, and then we'll go to the last part of the story. And that is like this. In the Sefer Ar Yashar, which is a fascinating Hebrew to learn through in this topic. So the Noda Yehuda talks about the Shagas Aryeh, and he says, what do you mean? He says, who is that? The Shagas Aryeh. So once the Shagas Aryeh got involved, and he's actually, I think, the first person who really wrote the tshuva to say that it's not a problem, and I mean a long tshuva, not a 3-line tshuva, that's already something. Okay. Anyway, the Noda Yehuda brings in the story of the get of Vienna Pulmis that we spoke about. He brings that in, and other Gedolim also bring that in here. And just one other quote, because it's a fascinating quote, and it became famous, sort of. The Noda Yehuda was a darshan. He gave drashas a few times a year in his kehila in Prague, which was a massive kehila, and the drashas. Fascinating drashas, and recently, a year or two ago, many the drashas, some were published in different places, some drashas were published, some were censored. Not Kitzer came out in a beautiful edition, and in there is a drasha he gave mamish in the middle of the Get of Cleves tumult. So you're going to say, why are we getting the people involved? Why is everyone mixing in? Anyways, the Noda Yehuda at one point says, he tells the Kehila, he says, I'm going to tell you a story that's going on right now. And he talks about this get, and it gets good. And he says as follows: Chachmei Frankfurt Postlo get. The Rav Chachmei Yisrael Atira. The Gam Ani Min Amatirim. And then he says like this: I hope they're going to come around. He says they don't understand the laws that they're saying on a get kosher. And he says it could be, he says, we find Gedolim make mistakes. And it's a Chil Hashem all the different cruzim that came out because of it, which we're going to discuss momentarily. It's not l'chvichvaydam, the tremendous chil Hashem, and I'm being mefarsim, the heter of this woman is no problem, and it's a good heter. So he made it his business to discuss it in the Shabbos drasha. How many people were at this drasha? So you never know, right? Interestingly enough, when I was reading it based on the way the Noam Yehuda wrote the drasha was published more recently, but the Noam Yehuda sent to this Reb Shimon, who's publishing in the Ara Yashar, there was 1,000 people at this drasha when he said it over. And there's other fascinating things in this drasha, but the point is that he set up a farhesia against the Bezdin of Frankfurt. Okay, so obviously there's also a chiddush in Hilchos Lashon Hara, but not for us right now. Anyway, okay. But Kitzer, the point is that the Gedolim at the time all reached a conclusion based on the Lamdas and the Sugis and Shaita, in Sugis and Chagiga, that this is not a problem for all different reasons. Okay. What about Frankfurt? What's going on here? These Gedolei Olam, why were they so strong against and not listening to what these Gedolim were writing into them? So it's very hard to know. And for years we did not know. And not only that, we know that the protocols and all the different things around the Frankfurt Bezdin, we have what's called Pinkasim. There's Pinkasim of Bezdins and Pinkasim of Frankfurt, and Frankfurt has many different documents that survive even today. All the stuff relating to the Bezdin of this controversy, it seems, was burnt on purpose. They didn't want anyone to know why they reached their conclusions, but they, ad Saif Yamehem, they remained strong that they were right and all the Gedolim were wrong, and they didn't want to even say why. We say it's not like if they would have said why, maybe people would have agreed with them. They didn't want to say why. Okay, fast forward to the 1880s and 1890s, and a book comes out in German on Rabbinic Frankfurt from a Talmud Chacham, a Rav of Frankfurt, Reb Horowitz. And it seems, he wrote a chapter about Reb Nosson Maz and Reb Avram Elisa, and he obviously has to have a chapter about the Get of Cleves. And basically, when you read this chapter, it's clear that he's coming to say, and he's from Frankfurt, and he's a tremendous Talmud Chacham, and he's a son-in-law, but he married the youngest daughter of Darchlan, and he's a Chashav Rav in Frankfurt. He's coming out, the Frankfurt city is right. So someone wrote into him, it seems, a letter. It says, "How you talking? You're going against the Sefer Ariyah. You're going against everyone. Where you coming from?" He goes, "Tell you the truth, I have a document that survived the whole thing," and he publishes a whole document in his Chuvas Mate Levi, which comes to explain what the Bezdin of Frankfurt said. And this is a document written. He says this is it's 10 pages approximately, and it's the documents written by Reb Nosson Maz, why they were accepting the get, why they said the get is not good. And it's clear is that they held that he was a shaita already from the beginning. Okay, the problem, as I said, it doesn't really help us so much. So we have that's Reb Nosson Maz held, but half the Gedolim and in the Sugya society, they said even if he did have a breakdown, then it doesn't make a difference as long as Rabbi Yisrael says that when he's having the conversation with him, or we know that he's better. Not only that, turns out less than a year later, because of all pressure, he ran away to England. Turns out. At one point, he comes back and he's all Shalom Yisrael. So Lamashal Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt says, "What's going on? He got better so fast. Avir de Inglia Machakim," he says such a line as Kilak Eretz Yisrael. What are you talking about? Answer is people get better fast. He wasn't so bad, and he wasn't even convinced that it was such a breakdown in the first place. The answer is, the kids he came back. Okay. Anyway, so this Mate Levi has this whole arichos, and he says that they were fired. You don't listen to all these gedolim, and the gedolim are wrong. And not interestingly enough, they don't talk about why they're not releasing the reasons, and they don't talk about why they're not releasing the reasons, and they also don't talk about the Cherem Rabbeinu Tam. They were given this job from the Manhim Bezdin, and that's it. Okay, and he's a shaita l'kal shitas. They also go. Reb Nosson Maz also goes through the sugya of Chagiga. Okay, anyway, interesting to see. Now, just a few short yediyas, and then and we'll conclude like this. Basically, like this. In this Frankfurt, so Mate Levi is published. So in 1979, the Mate Levi is republished by his grandson or something, a Chashav Yid, and what he does is he publishes original Pachkevila that were published in Frankfurt during these fights. And if you look at them, they're vicious. They're vicious against the Gedolim. They're vicious languages in this thing, and they're saying terrible things. They say terrible things about Lamashal. We said the Markevis HaMishnah. They burnt. Not only that, it's clear they burnt once the Cleves of Bright, 10 Gedolei Olam get involved, they burnt before Hesia in the basic Knesset. After Mincha, they burnt all these documents before Hesia. I mean, say this is the Hamoinam is getting involved. This is clear. I don't think that Rav Maz said, after he gave a clap in the bima, we're going out to burn. Basically, what happens a lot of times, like Frankfurt is not a little shtetl; it's a massive city, and it was a very proud city. And basically, it could be they have their reasons behind it, but the point is that it was mamish layudim ma'isayir. These cruzim they got around, they mevaza gedolim geferlich, and they published them where this anical. They were discovered again, and he publishes them in his reprint in the 1979 edition of Mate Levi. Okay, fine. Fascinating idea. Come across this randomly. Rabbi Yashiv gets a present from this Rabbi Horowitz. He gives him his Mate Levi of his Zayda. Yashiv thanks him very much. Everything he says. I open it up, and I see that you publish the this story, and you want to be matzdik, the Maisa, the Bezdin of Frankfurt, and that they were right. Okay, fine. Okay, so he says you're going against the great Gedolim at the time. He says, "V'ilo hayalishkas hagazas kayim b'yameim heim hayu meiroshe Sanhedrin shakasav amar loy sasim devrayim." Means say the Noam Yehuda, the Shagasai, Rabbi Steiner, all these Gedolim, these are the giants of the time. He says, okay, but then you go ahead. You're taking a stand by publishing this document of Rav Maz. But then he says worse. You're publishing the kruzim that they're going against, that was published against these gedolim. Kruzim asheishim devrei bela al goyin Yisrael bal makevis mishnah. Asher kol yoyim shmeitze bepumen. Asher goyin bal carbon edim askamase kasav of avar aleinu ish kodesh. Val Masadar get Rabbi Yisrael harev miklev. Listen what Rabbi Yasha says. Shalav kasav ashar gesarye. Ba'oid ani chai lo etin bas Yisrael meishav vegoyin Yisrael vuz. Vanoid miyod kasav of Rabbim forcing zakim yeshiv yeshiva minor vadata. But Kitzer, you're publishing these kruzim. Rabbi Yasha says you should not. My advice is you should not, even though you're doing a kina, but Kitzer, you should not have published these kruzim that you published, which are vicious against the Gedolei Olam at the time. They were published at that time is a different story. But I'm saying is that I hold that it wasn't even the Gedolim. The Bezdin didn't order these kruzim to be written. How do I know this? So the problem is like this. There's a vicious machlokes that's going on over here. And how do you explain it? Literally, you're getting letters and letters from the Gedolei Olam at the time, and these are people, they know each other. And the Frankfurt Bezdin is being very strong and stubborn about this. What's pshat? So the answer I suspected, and reading the Ara Yashar once in a while, it comes up that there's other people involved. There's not only Gedolim, and this seems to be the case. I heard this many times from Rameir Shmulevitz, that a lot of times the Gedolei Olam in a particular fight, they're completely lishma. As Ramatas Yoai began, but then the Hamoinam people get involved. That also might mean well, but as they say, they don't have the special koyach of the Gedolim, the lishma of the Gedolim. And what I find is like this: it sounds like the various askanim in the tzibur, they were causing problems. Okay, this is a theory. Ara Yashar. It sounds like that he's saying it because he's not taking it out on all the them, but he says something. He's constantly saying against Rav Maz, who seems to be a tremendous gadol. Okay, how do I know this? Is that a document was published from Rav Dessler in the Dessler collection I mentioned a few times, Shneis Dar V'Dar, and basically the parnasim of the Kehila of Frankfurt seemed to have written to Amsterdam, to Shal Amsterdam's parnasim, and they said, you should convince your Rav that this get is not a good get, a whole Langa Megillah, a whole Arichos. And they say, Chas v'Shalom, we're not going to get involved. Our Rav paskin something, and he holds it gets not good to get. We go with our Rav. We're not mishtarayin in these type of topics. With the Frankfurt, now what happens like this? The Frankfurt, this is not the first case that the Frankfurt Askanim got involved in different things. Just right before, there was a fight in Klal Yisrael at the time, the tremendous fight with Rabbi Snayushis, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, the Pnei Yeshua, the Gadol Hadar at the time. Clear when you see all the stuff at the thing. He was the Rav of Frankfurt, and they're so proud of it. And he ends up, he leaves, and they couldn't get him back, and the Askanim are involved, and they don't let him back in. Where's it coming from? The people that were involved, that were Shaloi Lishma Bechlal, they were for the glory of the greatness to show the city of Frankfurt. So it could be that that's what was going on here. Anyway, okay, just to mention very briefly, to be Messiah like this. Number one is, in 1896, Yid Rabbi Yehuda Lebowski, he sees what the Mate Levi says, and he writes, what are you talking about? You're saying the whole story completely in the favor of Frankfurt. It's not like you're saying that's not how the story was. Okay, now, some people say there was a happy ending that ends up being the Chassan comes back, and I said already, when the Chassan came back, it sounds like it's completely normal, but what they say is they remarried. This is a story that in Frankfurt, the story is brought down, that's what happened. It's very unclear to say such a thing because the Ara Yasha comes out even later, and he doesn't say such a thing. And there'll be other sources at the time, but okay, he has a Kabbalah. Rabbi Horowitz is a Chashav Yid that they did get married. Okay, they got remarried. Okay, now, and just they say who ends up becoming the Rav of Frankfurt after Rav Lisa dies? The Hafla. So there's a legendary story that the Hafla, he's also one of the Gedolim at the time. It seems he wanted to write a tshuva that the get is good, but his pen kept on not working, and Lamaisa, because of that, he got the job. And to be Messiah, relating to this last story, is that they made the Askanim of the city of Frankfurt made a Kabbalah, made a takana that the Noam Yehuda, no family member of his is allowed into the city and any job in the city, anything to do with this city. Because they were so upset how he wrote these vicious letters, and they are incredible letters to see, taking them to task, and wow, vicious letters that the Noam Yehuda wrote. And so what's interesting is like this. A lot of times people like to make Shalom al Yisrael. This is what we're concluding with this thing. So there's letters of Rav Nosson Maz right after this controversy to different Gedolim, Svarim, and there's a whole thing with the letter of the Noam Yehuda. The Noam Yehuda writes him he writes to Noam Yehuda a letter. You got my sefer, back and forth. And in the letter, I see this interesting line, and the Noam Yehuda says, "I got your sefer." To Rav Nosson Maz, the sefer on Sanhedrin came out mamish then. He says, "But I don't know. Thank you for sending everything great. Ach amru li shu neged tikune kilaschem lahavi shama chibur chadash im loy berishun haparnasim." I don't know if you could bring a new sefer, my tshuva sefer, Noam Yehuda, into your city without an ishur of the parnasim of the city. I don't know what's going on here. What? The parnasim of the city have to give an ishur to Rav Nosson Maz, the Gadol Hadar of that city of Frankfurt, and tell, you could buy the Noam Yehuda. It sounds very funny. The answer is, and my suspicion is as follows. Because of what they were so upset at the Noam Yehuda, they made a takana. Noam Yehuda can't have anything. That was the reason. It means is they didn't want to let even the svarim of the Noam Yehuda in. They gave him, in the end, the story was they gave a ishur. The Nosson Maz could have the Noam Yehuda in the sefer. Baruch Hashem, because Noam Yehuda, I said the tshuvas and Noam Yehuda are not in there. Maybe that's even weiter. They didn't know that. Okay. Anyway, point is, this is a tremendous machlokes that rocked the world at the time, and the sugyas of shaita all come out in the different tshuvas. If one looks up online, the Ara Yasha, one can learn fascinating tshuvas relating to this sugya.
But before we close up, Rabbi Brott has to turn around and pull out a sefer that he wants to share with us.
Okay. So we mentioned in this episode a sefer called Ma'aseh Tuvia. The Ma'aseh Tuvia is a medical sefer. A lot of other interesting things written by a Chashav Yid. And so what's interesting is, who is this Ma'aseh Tuvia? So a book came out mamish recently called Ma'aseh Tuvia, Venice, 1708. Tuvia on Medicine and Science. It's a collection of articles, and basically is like this. Tuvia Kain, he's born in 1652, dies in 1729. He went to medical school in Italy. And he was he was a doctor for different. He ends up living in Yerushalayim, but this became an encyclopedia published in 1708, and it's used ad hayom. People use it. There's a lot of fascinating materials in the Ma'aseh Tuvia, which is relevant even today. And he knew a lot of the information of the time. One wants to read about him. You can read in David Ruderman has a beautiful chapter about him in his book called Jewish Thought and Scientific Discovery, and the last thing is in this book is a collection of different articles all about him that came out literally in the past 2 years. Okay, that's all I wanted to mention.
Okay, thank you very much. Wow, my head is spinning with all that information. I'm gonna have to listen again, at least once, to get even some of the information into my brain. But amazing. Hope people listen till the end and appreciate all the different facets of the Gedolim that were mentioned. And I'm sure on each one of these Gedolim, you could do a full episode of them and their Kehilas and their cities and the Tshuvas they were involved in. But we'll have to leave it here for now. These are just little teasers, little breadcrumbs of information. And we should get back together very soon. Thank you.
Amen.